Cabinet of Wonders, Chapter 13, The Hour Strikes. As Petra spoke, Sadie translated. Mara didn't ask any questions, but listened thoughtfully. Standing on Petra's palm, Astro's Phil was stiff with disapproval. Neil interrupted only once to say, "Your father designed the clock in Starro Square? Really? Prague celebrated its unveiling about a month ago. It's the most stunning thing I've ever seen. And the crowd was so transfixed, you can bet they weren't looking at their purses. Got a good haul that day." Petra told them almost everything, except about the clock's hidden powers. She had promised her father to keep that a secret, and Astrophil might have had a spider's equivalent of a heart attack if she broke that promise. She concluded, "So now you see why I want to get a job at the castle. I have to figure out how to get my father's eyes back. They don't belong to the prince. He stole them. My father loved his work, and the prince stole his happiness." Sadie translated for her mother. Then she said, "Don't worry, Petra. I'm sure I can find a job for you. The castle employs hundreds of people, and the head housekeeper is constantly looking for someone to do one job or another. They think well of me there. I'll introduce you to housekeeping." Then Damara asked something. Sadie said, My mother says that you will be risking your life to find your father's eyes. She wonders if your father would not prefer blindness." "My father has done everything for me. Now it is my turn to do something for him." After Damara listened to Sadie, she frowned. Then, with the slowness of someone choosing her words carefully, she said that she understood how Petra felt, but that she could not believe her father would agree. "Why not?" Petra replied. "Neil could get hanged for picking pockets, but you let him do it to bring in money. Why is this any different?" Neil scratched his head. Sadie, maybe you better not put that bit into Romany." Sadie looked at Petra, who said, "Tell her." Sadie shrugged and did. Damara's black eyes snapped, and she spoke fiercely, glaring at Neil. "She says that a green fairy must have sucked Neil's brains out of his ear when he was a baby, because she certainly didn't raise him to be so stupid." Neil rolled his eyes. "Come on, Neil. She's right. You may think stealing is a game, but—" "I don't. We need the money. Don't tell me we don't need the money." Sadie started to say something, but Damara cut into the conversation, this time in a gentler voice. Her children fell silent. Sadie translated. "Ma says that she knows Neil is trying to help, and there's nothing she can do to stop him." "Darn right," he muttered. "She has always had confidence that he wouldn't be caught. His ghost fingers make that impossible. Or, at least, we thought it was impossible. But she points out that you, Petra, don't have the gift of Danier's fingers. How can you hope to succeed?" Petra felt the glow of a sudden idea. "What if Neil were to help me? If the prince doesn't value my father's eyes, he'll keep them someplace where they'd be easy to steal. I could do that on my own. But he wouldn't have gone through the trouble of taking them if he didn't think they were special, so he probably keeps them someplace hard to break into. If that's the case, then I'm sure he locks them up with other valuable things. If Neil helped me, he could take some of those things and sell them. Then you would have enough money to buy your horses." Her proposal was met with silence. Astrophil stared with incredulous green eyes. Sadie crossed her arms. "I'm not translating that." "If you won't, I will." Neil began to speak excitedly to his mother in Romany. She raised her eyes to the ceiling as if asking it for help. She shouted something that Petra was willing to bet anything meant. "Even if I was in my grave, I'd rise out of it to tell you no, never, not in a million years." Or something to that effect. Damara pounded her fist against the cloth-covered floor. Their voices grew louder and louder. Finally, Sadie shouted, "Dosta!" Damara exhaled one long breath. When she spoke, her voice was calmer but strong. Sadie said, "My mother says that if you want to risk your neck, Petra, that's your business. She respects your decision, if not your sense of self-preservation. But her son will not take part in your plan. She says you're welcome to stay here for the midday meal and to return anytime you wish. But you will no longer be welcome if you try to drag Neil into your plan." She glared at her brother. "And I, for one, agree." "And I, for one—" Neil stopped. He shrugged. "Well, I can't argue against both of you, can I?" Sadie looked relieved, but a little suspicious. "All right, then, let's eat." At lunch, Petra found herself at the center of attention. Emil and a few others gave her disgusted looks, but most of the Lavari were kindly curious. Ethelenda, the woman who had been roasting the meat when they arrived, gave Petra a thick slice. One of the girls pointed to Petra, and Neil asked a question, wrinkling her nose. He laughed. "She wants to know why your clothes are so ugly." "Are they? Well, brown and brown aren't exactly the liveliest colors. Makes me think of pine cones, burned pine porridge, rags after scrubbing down a muddy wagon, and horse droppings." "I like pine cones," Petra said defensively. Ethelenda offered to pierce her ears. No thanks," Petra said. You might actually want to dress more like a girl, Sadie said. Coming from Lucy, this advice always made Petra grit her teeth, but she listened to Sadie. I can see why you wanted to walk around Prague in trousers. No one thinks twice about a boy being alone in the streets, but there's no point in trying to convince people at the castle that you're a boy. In fact, I'd advise against it. The job that the housekeeper is always looking to fill only goes to boys, and if is always looking to fill only goes to boys, and you don't want it. What is it? Cleaning out the privies. Oh, I see. Maybe skirts aren't so bad after all, Petra sighed. So much for my short-lived disguise. It didn't work that well anyway, said Neil. After lunch, a young man set up a wooden board 100 paces away from the campfire. The target was a painted red circle the size of a melon, with a walnut-sized black dot marking its center. Damara slipped a dagger from her tall boot and was the first to throw, thwacking the blade's point into the black spot, met where the black spot met the red circle's border. Everyone clapped. When the young people began taking their turn, then the young people began taking their turn. Many of them missed the board entirely, everyone groaned, or just hit plain wood. Two of them threw the blade respectably into the red. A girl complained that she couldn't even see the black spot at that distance. At that, Emil stood up and said he would show them how this game was done. With the grace of a snake rearing to its head to bite, Emil leaned back and threw, the shiny blade spinning from his fingers. He scored a direct hit on the black. Someone whistled admiringly. One woman shook her head as if she had touched something hot. Emil grinned. Sadie rolled her eyes. Then Emil said something to Petra that she didn't understand. His voice was friendly, but he smirked. Neil said, "Do you want to throw?" Now Petra had only used knives for chopping vegetables, cutting meat, carving bits of wood into horses, and most recently, cutting her hair. So she didn't have high hopes for her chances at hitting the target at 100 paces. But Emil's attitude irritated her. If she refused, he would be pleased. If she missed, he would be pleased. If she managed to at least hit the board, she could walk away from the Lavari with pride. She said she would give the dagger game a try. Ever done this before? Neil asked. No. Let me show you a couple things. He pulled out his knife. Now, if you start like this, and he cocked his hand, you're liable to throw it so that the handle hits the board, not the blade. Watch. He threw, and the knife clattered against the wood and fell. The group made hooting calls. Neil retorted in Romany, explaining, Petra assumed, that he had meant to do that. The onlookers laughed, shaking their heads in disbelief. They flapped their hands at him. He shrugged and seemed to say that they could believe what they wanted. He went to pick the fallen knife and walked back to the campfire. The dagger floated below his hand. He was carrying it by the blade with Danier's fingers. Now I can hold it like this. The knife lifted, covering about a foot above his hand, the iron tip pointing at the board. Neil threw the dagger, it sank to the air and thwacked straight into the black. The Roma were not nearly as impressed as Petra was. They had seen this many times before. One of Emil's friends said that Neil had used an unfair advantage. Unfair, Neil muttered to Petra. Even if you got the ghost, you still have to learn how to use them. Danior did. It's not like I don't practice to be able to do that. Huffily, he fetched the knife for a third throw. You should hold it like this. He gripped the knife normally and tilted his wrist. He glanced at Petra to see if she could tell the difference between how he was holding it now and how he had held it the first time. To her surprise, she could. She nodded. He threw, and the knife went into the red. Now it was her time. When she held the knife, she was curious to find that it felt very natural. She seemed to sense the knife in her mind, like a tiny needle that pricked gently. She knew how she should hold her fingers and how to angle her arm, her wrist, and the metal blade. It seemed as simple as adding rain to a scale until you could see the needle flicker to the exact weight you wanted. Petra squinted. The black center was about as big as a freckle. But when she threw, she knew the blade would hit black, and it did. Neil whistled and clapped Petra hard on the back. The rest of the Lavari had different ways of responding. Everyone looked at least a little taken back. Sadie and a few others applauded, and many began speaking among themselves. Petra heard one word repeated, Patali. What's Patali? She asked Neil. It means lucky. They're saying you've got beginner's luck. Really? Petra replied archly and walked to pluck the steel dagger from the board. She liked this game. This time she didn't take long finding the right position for the throw. She confidently let the blade spin from her fingers. She hit the black mark again. She turned to Neil with a grin. My family has always had a way with metal. A couple hours later, Petra said she had to go back to her inn. She and Sadie agreed to meet in the morning at 8 o'clock in the castle stables. Petra shouldered her pack. I'll walk you home, Neil said. They set out through the trees together, heading for the center of town. They walked the whole way. Petra told him about the differences between Okno and Prague. She described her family and Tomik. Neil's voice painted vibrant images of the different places he had lived in, like Spain, Portugal, Hungary, and North Africa. Once they crossed Karloff Bridge into the older part of town, Petra thought that they would retrace their steps back to the shore and lamb and the market, but Neil led her in a different direction. I want to show you something. He brought her to a square that was flanked by soaring towers that prickled with spires. In the center of the square, people were massed around a tall, slender building with a pointed roof. They seemed to be waiting for something. Petra could see only the back of the building, but she guessed what it was before Neil shouted, "Hurry up! It's almost time for the hour to strike." They ran into the crowd and jostled for a good view. Petra stood in awe. The clock was even more beautiful than she imagined. Her father had said, the clock's face showed a brassica field rippling in the breeze. Golden Roman numerals ringed the dial. Signs of the zodiac, also in gold, flashed in a constant circle as a flat blue plate made of lapis lazuli spun below the face. Tiny green copper dragons peered down from the pointed roof above the clock's face. Their twisted tails were streaked with gold. Then the silver minute hand and the gold hour hand reached the number 5 together. Jets of water sprang up in the air on either side of the clock in the form of dripping lilies of the valley. Small children splashed in the water below. Melodious chimes rang. Above the clock's face, blue double doors folded open. Small statues appeared in one door. They turned to face the audience. Then they disappeared behind the second door. It was a parade of good and evil. First came the devil, then an angel, then a miser clinging his money bag, then a woman scattering brassica seeds, then death as a skeleton. Last came life, a young girl who looked like Petra. She slipped behind the second door. The blue doors shut. The wings of the copper dragons shuddered like leaves, and a red rooster statue at the top of the tower crowed. Petra was speechless. The clock was unbelievably lovely and must have been very difficult to design. When they reached the inn's doors, Neil said, I might be seeing you at the castle. You might? Yeah. I've been thinking about what Sadie said. I decided it's about time I gave up picking pockets and tried my hand at a real job. Thought I'd see if Tabor could get me to work in the stables. He sounded serious, but his yellowy eyes twinkled. But of course, you wouldn't have to stay in the stables, Petra said craftily. I'm sure that once you got a job at the castle, you could probably explore different parts of it pretty freely. Yep, and maybe I'll get a notion of where the prince stashes his pretties. Sadie and your mother won't like it. Oh, I suppose not, but there's no reason for them to know, right? I believe it would cause them unnecessary stress, Astrophil chimed in. Most unnecessary, Neil shook his head and sighed. Sometimes adults just don't know what's good for them. He began walking away, but glanced over his shoulder to wink at her. See you later, Patali.